Hi, this is Terry from True Marie Soapworks. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this soap. It's a Kaleidoscope soap, or it's also a pull-through technique. I took a poll in my last video to see what you wanted to see next, and this one won by 54% of the votes. This technique was featured in Amy Warden's Soap Challenge Club in May of this year, and it was taught by Joanne Watkins of Nature's Potion Handmade Soaps. And I got the idea of using a part from a bubble machine from Gosia of Maggie Diu Soaps. And I will leave a link to her Instagram page in the description below. Also, Belinda Williams of Love Your Suds has some soap shaper tools that you can buy that do this very same thing if you don't want to make them. You can find details to her as well in the description below. Okay, let's get started. First, I'm going to show you a little bit about how I put my mold together. This mold is from Brambleberry and it's only $10, and I lined it with a piece of freezer paper. The previous time I made this, I had trouble with my pull-through tool sticking to the bottom. It floated up about a third of the way, so my design was only on the top part of the column. I had to think of a way to keep it down, and what I came up with was using a magnet. So I cut the top out of a soup can and I put that in between two pieces of plastic, and I put that on the bottom, and then I cut down my bubble pull through tool and put a little magnet in the middle. And you can see that sticks together just enough to keep it down, but it's easy to pull off when I have it attached to the bottom. So I just brought the plastic up around it, and then I fastened it with rubber bands, and then I'll just put the bottom part on. There's a cap that covers the bottom of this mold over the plastic and over that can lid that I didn't show very well, but just know that there's something else on the bottom. The first time I made this, I just used a dowel rod in the middle of the bubble tool that just fit right in there, and it was fine, but the problem I had with it was very hard to get the soap batter to be centered in the mold. The next time I made it, I tied strings to 4 of the points on the tool, and I tied them with knots, and the knots seemed to cause a lot of drag. So this time when I'm making it, I sewed on these thin ribbons, and that seemed to have less drag when I pulled it through. And I just arrange it so that the ribbons are in their right places, and I just tape them to the side, and I put little tabs on the tape so I can remove them easily when I'm ready to do the pull-through design. Okay, let's get started on our batch. First, I use about a third of my water weight in distilled water ice cubes, and then I top it off with the remaining water weight in cold water. Next, I measure my sodium hydroxide and I add that to my water. Stir right away to make sure that it doesn't settle to the bottom and form a crust. After I get that dissolved, I measure my sodium lactate, and I use 1 teaspoon per pound of oils for that. I don't add the sodium lactate yet. I add that when my lye solution has cooled. I set these ingredients aside in a place that is well ventilated but safe from any children or pets. Next, I measure my hard oils, and I start with my coconut oil and then my palm oil. This palm oil is RSPO Sustainable Palm Oil, and it is also no stir palm oil, so it just can be scooped out. It doesn't have to be completely melted before adding it. And it's from Elements Bath & Body. Next, I measure my fragrance, and today I'm using Yuzu fragrance, and it's a very slow moving fragrance, and it smells really citrusy. It's wonderful, and it's from Elements Bath & Body. After that, I measure my liquid oils, and I start with my castor oil and then my olive oil. After my coconut oil and palm oil are melted, I add my cocoa butter pastilles, and these are from Brambleberry, and I stir them until they're melted, or if I need to microwave them slightly, I just microwave them until they're barely melted. Next, I prepare my squeeze bottles, and I use this sealed air packaging, and I just slide that into the bottles. And I learned this tip from the Soap Challenge Club, and it saves so much time, and I don't have to clean out those bottles because it's very hard to get all the soap out of there. I've cut the lids off of these squeeze bottles a little bit so more comes out, and now I'm actually making extensions for the lids so that they can be more accurate when I'm pouring. So I cut the pipettes down, and I cut little slits in the end so they'll go around the lids of the squeeze bottles. I had a little bit of trouble getting the electrical tape to stick to the bottles because there was probably a little oil residue on them, so I used my isopropyl alcohol and cleaned them off, and it stuck fine. If you're going to make this batch, you actually need 4 squeeze bottles prepared. I only had 3 in this one because this is the following batch that I made, and I decided to film this so you can see how I do it. Okay, next we're going to prepare our colorants, and these are all from Elements Bath & Body. And for our first colorant, we have Blinded by the Light. I'm using that at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. And I'm using that for 20% of my batter. I figured out all these colorant amounts using Elements Bath & Body's colorant calculator, and I have a link to that in the description below. For the next colorant, I used a combination of the radioactive green and the Blinded by the Light yellow, and I used each of those at a rate of 1/2 teaspoon per pound of oils, and I also used those for 20% of my batter. Okay, for my next color, I used Cosmic Aurora Purple Neon Pigment, and I used it at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oil, so it would be the same usage rate as the yellow, and it is also for 20% of my batter. For the last color, I wanted a navy blue, so I used a combination of ultramarine blue and smooth coconut carbon, and I used the blue at a rate of 3/4 teaspoon per pound of oils, and I used the black at a rate of 1/4 teaspoon per pound of oils, and I used this for 40% of my batter. Now that my lye water has cooled, I add my sodium lactate. Then I add my liquid oils to my melted hard oils. Next, I strain my lye solution into my oil solution, and I rarely ever catch anything in my strainer, but once in a while there's a little clump of lye that doesn't get dissolved because a little humidity got to it and it just gets super hard. And you just don't want that in your final batch, so that's why I strain my lye solution. I also added my fragrance to the mixture. Next, I stick blended my batter, and I just stick blended it until an emulsion was reached. That's when it's going to stay together, but it's not at trace yet. And then I split my batter off into 320% and 140%. Next, I add my color to my batter, and I use the navy blue for the bigger amount. Once all the colorant is mixed in completely, I want to make sure and get my batter to trace. So this batter was still a little thin, so I wanted to just speed it up slightly. Now that I'm happy with the consistency of the batter, I just add it to my squeeze bottles. I just started squeezing these in, and when I first started the squeeze, I squeezed really slow just to make sure that my point was centered in the middle. And then I squeezed a little longer than I thought I should, because in my previous one I seemed to get a lot of color, more than I wanted in each design. So now at the top of this I did get a little too close together, and you can see on my final design how close the colors are, and I didn't like it as much. But it was getting thicker, and actually when I finished this, I didn't think it came out at all. I thought my batter got too thick. Here I'm pulling out the tool. It's not really much to see, and it happens pretty quickly, but you can see the top was kind of smeared, and that's why I didn't think I really got anything in my design. But as I cut it, I really was super excited about the outcome. So here we go. I'm just marking these for 1-inch divisions. And the first end I will be cutting is what was the bottom end. Now that I'm cutting my soap, I'll just share a little bit about what I've learned. This is my third pull through I made, so I've kind of been sharing my tips all along of what I have learned, but here's a few that I wanted to highlight. First, the mold that I got from Brambleberry has a liner with it, but I would suggest if you get that mold, which is it was like $9.99 or something. It's a column mold, and I have all the details in my description below, but if you get that mold, I would still suggest lining it with freezer paper. And make sure that you seal up the bottom like I did with the rubber bands and some plastic around the bottom, because it does kind of seep out a little bit. The next tip I have is just to make sure that you're using contrasting colors, or that you're pouring contrasting colors next to each other, just so you have the maximum impact for this design. Next, just make sure your pull through tool is going to stay on the bottom. Mine didn't stay on the bottom in one of my designs, and it was because I was just using string, so there wasn't enough weight to hold it down. So maybe you could come up with something like I did with the magnet. It just needs to be weighted a little bit to stay at the bottom. Another tip is to make sure you're using a recipe that doesn't have too many saturated fats in it. My recipes for doing swirls and things that need to remain fluid are usually about 43% saturated and 57% unsaturated fats, so that's how I usually can tell if my recipe is going to remain fluid longer. If you use Soap Calc, you can find your percentage of saturated to unsaturated, or it's a ratio actually out of 100. It's in the upper right hand corner of your printout when you're using Soap Calc. Also though, at the same time, you want to pour your soap when it's thick enough so it doesn't get muddied together. So make sure your soap is at a light trace or light to medium trace. It just needs to be thick enough. It can't be watery. And if it starts to get thick on you, don't panic, just keep going, because you saw that mine got thicker and I thought it was not going to work, and it pulled through fine. So just keep going and don't get flustered. Another tip is just to try your very best to get your design centered. So that means just starting barely to pour, and then if it's not centered, adjust a little bit before you pour more, because the design just comes out so much better if it's centered. Another tip that I have is just to pour a little more than you would think, because it seems to come out a lot better when you have a little bit bigger amounts of color together. So those last few that I did, you can see they're kind of muddied together, and to me they didn't come out as good, and that's when the batter was getting thicker. So if the batter's getting thicker, squeeze just a little more than you would think so that you can get that great color. The last tip I have for you is just to bang down your mold periodically. When you use squeeze bottles, it tends to get a little bit of air bubbles in there, so just take it and bang it down to get those air bubbles to come to the surface and pop. I hope you've learned something today, and if you have, just comment below and let me know what you learned. Thank you to all of you who voted in the poll, and the next result was the mini drop swirl, and I don't think I'm doing that next because I'm participating in the soap challenge this month, so I will probably be focusing on that. I would like to encourage you all to participate in the soap challenge. It's just something that you learn so much, and I have learned so much of what I know from the soap challenge. So there's a link to the soap challenge below. And if you are wondering about those other techniques that I showed for the poll, I will be eventually doing all of those. Also, if you're interested in joining a soap making group, I have one, and we talk about different soaping issues and also do troubleshooting and just share what you've done, and you get a lot of encouragement. If you're joining the group, make sure and join under your personal Facebook page, and also there's going to be 3 questions to answer, and you have to answer those questions to get into the soap making group. If you're already in the soap making group and you're in it under your business name, please leave the group and come in under your personal Facebook name, because we've had a little trouble with things pertaining to that. This is a Facebook group, so you can go on Facebook and search it, and it's called True Marie Soapworks, but my business page is also called True Marie Soapworks, so look for the group. And also you can just scroll down in the description and I have a link to both of those. Thank you to those of you who placed orders during the week, and also my inventory might be going rather low because I'm having some local craft shows, and the earlier you place your orders the better, because my selection will be getting rather slim in these days coming up. If you're new to my channel and haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications for the next time I post. I hope you've learned something today, and if you have, please give a thumbs up and comment and share with your soap making friends, and have a great day.